My name is Martin. I'm 84 years old. People think I'm crazy when I tell them how old I am. I'd like to be normal. I just have a sickness. You see, people don't understand what's wrong. They think that I'm a monster. They think I'm a vampire. People don't realize that those things they see in the movies are not real.
Martin.
I would like to be like everyone else.
From the director of Night of the Living Dead. Martin.
It was the vacation they had dreamed of for a lifetime. Peter Fonda, Loretta Swit, Warren Oates, Laura Parker.
Here's the best damn vacation we may ever have in our lives.
But the wilderness wasn't quite as peaceful as they imagined.
What is it? An orgy, maybe? Yeah. Huh?
They saw more than they bargained for. It was too late. The damage was done. Once you've seen the devil, will anyone on your side? From now on, they would never think of anything else again. They tried to leave, but there's no getting away from the devil. They weren't safe outside.
Oh, no, they killed my dog. Oh, no, they killed my dog.
They weren't safe inside. They weren't even safe on the road.
Ray! Get the gun! They're trying to break.
Caught in a race for their lives with forces of evil. Just when it's to go out again, they come and get you.
Hey, everybody, lighten up. It's all over.
Crack them in the head and open up their vermouth for 2 seconds.
You can't win when you're in a race with the devil.
The figure is small. That is the first thing you notice. A tiny shape in a red coat moving at the far end of a narrow alley somewhere in Venice, through the rain and the fog and the low amber light of a city that has been sinking for centuries. The man watching it cannot breathe. You cannot breathe either, because that coat belongs to someone who is already dead. You did not see that in a theater. You saw it late at night, on a television set with bad reception, or on a VHS tape that somebody dubbed from somebody else's copy. The picture slightly washed out, the sound a half second behind, which somehow made it worse. The horror section at the video store had tapes with cover art that looked like they were designed by someone who genuinely wanted to frighten children. And some of those tapes, the ones with the creased corners and the cloudy cases, those were the ones that followed you home. Not every disturbing film from the 1970s made it onto television in one piece. Network standards and practices existed for a reason, and that reason was to protect viewers from exactly the kind of films we are talking about tonight. Some were cut, some were quietly shelved, some aired once at 2 a.m. and were never scheduled again, and some of you found them anyway. Tonight we are going into 7 of them, 7 films from the 1970s that were too psychologically unsettling, too morally unresolved, or too deeply strange for television to handle without flinching. And one of them, I promise you, is a title that almost nobody talks about anymore. A film so quietly disturbing that it disappeared from the cultural conversation almost completely, and yet if you saw it as a kid, you have never fully stopped thinking about it. One scene on this list will bring back the exact feeling of sitting in a dark room, younger than you should have been, watching something you were not prepared for, and understanding for the first time that some films do not end when the credits roll.
Phantasm. Is it a nightmare? Phantasm. Is it an illusion? Phantasm. Is it an evil?
You have to take me home.
But why?
No questions. You must take me home.
Phantasm. Is it a fantasy? Phantasm. Is it alive?
There was nobody driving.
Whatever it is, if this one doesn't scare you, you're already dead. Phantasm.
Phantasm arrived in 1979, like a transmission from somewhere your mind goes when a fever will not break. Director Don Coscarelli was 22 years old when he made it, and that matters, because no one older and more reasonable would have made a film that operates entirely on the logic of a nightmare you cannot explain to someone else the next morning. The story follows a teenage boy named Mike, who becomes convinced that the local mortician, a towering pale figure, known only as the Tall Man, is doing something unspeakable to the bodies of the dead. But the film is not really about what the Tall Man is doing. It is about the specific terror of being young and knowing something is deeply wrong, and having no adult who will believe you. That anxiety, the one where you are the only person who can see what everyone else refuses to see, was something an entire generation of 1970s teenagers understood in their bones. The peak moment does not involve anything you can easily describe. It is a corridor. It is the sound of something metallic moving through the air faster than it should. It is the look on a face in the half-second before something irreversible happens. Coscarelli holds the camera just long enough for your imagination to finish the sentence, and what your imagination writes is always worse than anything a screenplay could have put there. Television did not know what to do with Phantasm, because television needs resolution. It needs an explanation. Phantasm offers neither. The ending does not close. It opens into something darker, and the sequels that followed over the decades never fully sealed it either. The Tall Man became one of horror's most quietly iconic figures, not because of what he does, but because of what he represents. The adult world seen through a child's eyes, enormous and cold, and utterly indifferent to whether you survive the encounter. And if Phantasm unsettled you because the threat came from a stranger in a place meant for the dead, the next film will unsettle you for the opposite reason, because the threat in this one comes from people who look exactly like your neighbors, your friends, and everyone you thought you could trust.
They come from a dying world. They drift through the universe, pushed on by the solar winds. They adapt, and they survive. The function of all life is survival. Sleep, sleep, sleep. From deep space, sleep, sleep. The seed is planted. Sleep, sleep. Terror grows. Sleep.
Matthew! Matthew! Matthew!
Like the others.
Elizabeth, wake up! Get you when you sleep. Sit up!
Now, the classic fear begins to grow.
We're being cornered.
In a modern masterpiece of science fiction.
They're barricading the street.
Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
There is a moment in this film where a man opens his mouth to scream, and the sound that comes out is not human. It is not a monster sound either. It is something in between, something that uses the shape of a human throat to produce a warning meant for everything around it except you. And the worst part is that the face producing that sound belongs to someone you have been watching for the entire film, someone you trusted. Philip Kaufman's 1978 remake of the 1956 original is the rare case where the second version is more disturbing than the first, not because it is louder or more extreme, but because it is more precise about what it is afraid of. The 1970s in America were a decade of institutional collapse. Watergate had just finished teaching an entire generation that the people in charge were not who they claimed to be. The counterculture had curdled. Neighbors reported on neighbors. The film understood that the most terrifying version of paranoia is the one that turns out to be completely justified. The story follows a San Francisco health inspector named Matthew Bennell, who begins to suspect that the people around him are being replaced, one by one, while they sleep, by emotionless duplicates grown from alien pods. The horror is not in the replacement itself. It is in the moment just before you are certain. The moment where you look at someone you have known for years and something behind their eyes is just slightly wrong, and you cannot yet prove it, and you cannot yet run. The peak terror in this film is not a set piece. It is a conversation. Two people talking, one of whom may or may not still be the person they were yesterday, and the camera staying on both faces long enough that you stop being sure which one you should be more afraid of. Kaufman understood that the most disturbing thing he could put on screen was ambiguity with a deadline. Network television could air the premise of this film. It could not air the ending. The final scene is one of the most genuinely bleak conclusions in American horror history, not because of what is shown, but because of what it confirms. There is no cavalry. There is no last-minute rescue. There is only the sound and the face, and the understanding that you waited one conversation too long. The film left behind a template that horror has been borrowing from ever since. The idea that the most efficient way to destroy a person is not to kill them, but to replace them with something that remembers everything they knew and feels nothing about any of it. Invasion of the Body Snatchers was about losing yourself to something external, something that came from outside and hollowed you out while you slept. The next film is about something far more claustrophobic, a man who invites the darkness in himself, who cannot tell where his delusion ends and reality begins, and who the film never once tries to correct.
My name is Martin. I'm 84 years old. People think I'm crazy when I tell them how old I am. I'd like to be normal. I just have a sickness. See, people don't understand what's wrong. They think that I'm a monster. They think I'm a vampire. People don't realize that those things they see in the movies are not real.
Martin.
I would like to be like everyone else.
From the director of Night of the Living Dead. Martin.
George Romero made this film 2 years before Dawn of the Dead, and almost nobody talks about it. That is not an accident. Martin is the kind of film that the horror community keeps at a slight distance because it does not give you the comfort of knowing what it is. It is not quite a monster movie. It is not quite a psychological thriller. It is something that sits in the space between those two things and refuses to move. Martin is a young man, quiet and pale and unremarkable, who believes he is a vampire, not in the dramatic cape and castle tradition. He has no fangs. He cannot transform. He is not repelled by crosses or sunlight. He is simply a young man who is certain, with complete calm, that he is very old and that he requires blood to survive. Whether he is right is the question the film spends 89 minutes refusing to answer. Romero was working in Pittsburgh with a tiny budget and a cast of unknowns, and what he produced was one of the most unsettling portraits of a disturbed mind that American horror had produced to that point. The 1970s were obsessed with the interior life of the outsider, the young man who does not fit, who sees the world through a framework. Nobody around him shares. Taxi Driver came out a year earlier. Martin belongs in the same conversation, except Romero never lets you fully decide whether his protagonist is delusional or genuinely something other than human. The most disturbing scenes are not the ones you might expect. They are the quiet ones. Martin on the phone with a late-night radio host who has given him the nickname Nosferatu as a joke, talking in a flat, effectless voice about what he is and what he needs, and the radio host laughing, and Martin not laughing, and you sitting there trying to determine which one of them understands the situation correctly. The film keeps staging those moments, small collisions between Martin's certainty and everyone else's dismissal, and each time it refuses to settle the question. Television could not air Martin, because the film's central ambiguity was its entire point, and television in the 1970s did not trust its audience to sit with unresolved moral questions about a protagonist who may or may not be a predator. The film was cut in several markets, re-edited by distributors who tried to make it into something more conventional, and largely forgotten outside of serious horror circles, until Romero's reputation grew large enough to pull it back into the light. What Martin leaves behind is a question that has no comfortable answer. If the delusion is complete enough, if the person living inside it is consistent enough, at what point does the diagnosis stop mattering? The film does not ask that question directly. It just puts Martin on screen, and lets him be exactly who he is, and trusts you to feel the weight of it long after the last frame. Martin disturbed people because they could not categorize him, could not place him safely on the monster side of the line where horror is supposed to keep its threats. The next film has no such ambiguity about its villains. They are ordinary people. They live in ordinary houses. They worship something ancient and patient, and they have been watching the road into town for a very long time.
Vacation they had dreamed of for a lifetime. Peter Fonda, Loretta Swit, Warren Oates, Laura Parker.
Here's the best damn vacation we may ever have in our lives.
But the wilderness wasn't quite as peaceful as they imagined.
What is it? Oh, an orgy, maybe? Yeah. Huh?
They saw more than they bargained for.
See this?
It was too late. The damage was done. Once you've seen the devil, will anyone on your side? From now on, they would never think of anything else again. They tried to leave, but there's no getting away from the devil. They weren't safe outside.
Oh, Daddy, kill my dog. Oh, Daddy, kill my dog.
They weren't safe inside. They weren't even safe on the road.
Frank! Get the gun! They're trying to break.
Caught in a race for their lives with forces of evil. Just when it's to go out again, they come and get you.
Hey, everybody, lighten up. It's all over.
Crack them in the head and open up their vermouth for 2 seconds.
You can't win when you're in a race with the devil.
Two couples rent an RV and drive into the Texas Hill Country for a vacation. They are normal people with normal lives. One of them owns a motorcycle shop. They have cold beer in the cooler and an easy route mapped out, and absolutely no reason to believe that stopping for the night in an empty field off a dark road will be the decision that ends everything. Then one of them looks out the window at the wrong moment and sees something in the tree line by firelight that he was never supposed to see. What follows is one of the most purely relentless films the 1970s produced, not because it is graphic, but because it understands something about paranoia that most horror films get wrong. The threatened race with the devil is not a single monster you can outrun, or a single location you can escape. The threat is systemic. The cult that witnessed is not a small, isolated group of eccentrics in one county. It is everywhere. The gas station attendant, the campground host, the sheriff's deputy who takes the report with a face that gives away nothing and eyes that give away everything. Every stop these four people make on their way toward safety turns out to be another room in the same trap. Peter Fonda and Warren Oates anchor the film with a specific kind of 1970s American masculinity, the kind that instinctively reaches for competence and problem solving when confronted with something it does not understand. They map the routes, they arm themselves, they call the authorities. They do everything reasonable people do when something unreasonable is hunting them. And none of it is enough, because the film is not interested in reassuring you that reason is a sufficient defense against what has decided to follow them down the highway. The most disturbing sequence does not happen at night. It happens in broad daylight, at a crowded campground, surrounded by families and children, and the ordinary noise of an American summer vacation. Something is wrong with the campground. Something is wrong with the people in it. The normalcy of the setting is precisely what makes the wrongness so hard to shake, because the film is telling you that there is no safe version of any of this, that the familiar landscape of American leisure has been compromised in ways you cannot see until it is far too late. Network television would not air the ending. It tested the version with an alternate conclusion, and that version is also deeply unsettling, which tells you something about what the filmmakers were working with. The theatrical cut closes on a single image that reframes everything the audience thought they understood about how far the threat actually extended, and the silence after that image is the kind of silence that stays with you on the drive home. Race with the Devil was largely overlooked because it arrived in the same year as Jaws and got buried under the first wave of the modern blockbuster. But the people who saw it in theaters, or caught it on a grainy late night cable broadcast, did not forget it, because it confirmed something they had already begun to suspect, that the open road, the great American symbol of freedom and escape, could be the corridor of a trap just as easily as it could be the way out of one. Race with the Devil terrified people because the enemy had no face you could identify until it was already beside you. The next film takes that fear and makes it architectural, sets it inside a place that is supposed to be sacred, and asks what happens when the walls of a community close around you so completely that the sky itself begins to feel like part of the design.
I could a tale unfold whose lightest word would harrow up thy soul, freeze thy young blood. Dear God in heaven, even these people can't be that mad.
Where is Rowan Morrison?
If Rowan Morrison existed, we would know.
I suspect murder.
He was, but you are the fool, Mr. Howard.
Where is Rowan Morrison?
Oh my God!
Every frame of this film is lit like a postcard. That is the first thing that disarms you. The island of Summerisle sits off the coast of Scotland, under skies that are almost unreasonably beautiful, full of green fields and flowering orchards and villagers, who sing and dance and welcome the stranger at the gate with open, unhurried smiles. Sergeant Neil Howie arrives on official police business, looking for a missing child, and the village gives him everything except what he came for. They are helpful, they are cheerful, they are completely, serenely unbothered by his authority. And that unbothered quality is where the dread begins to accumulate, quietly, like water filling a room you have not yet noticed has no door. Robin Hardy directed this film on a modest British budget, with a cast that included Christopher Lee at his most controlled and unsettling, playing Lord Summerisle with the particular confidence of a man who already knows how the story ends. The 1970s in Britain carried their own specific anxieties about the relationship between ancient tradition and modern institutions, about what happens when official authority walks into a system of belief that predates it by centuries and does not recognize its jurisdiction. Howie is a devout Christian and a representative of the state, and the film spends its entire running time demonstrating, with elaborate patience, that neither of those things will protect him. What makes The Wicker Man so deeply disturbing is not anything it conceals. It is everything it shows you openly. The villagers are not hiding their beliefs. They are not pretending to be something they are not. They answer Howie's questions honestly within the framework of their own logic, and their logic is internally consistent and completely alien to everything he understands about how the world works. The horror here is not deception. It is the discovery that there exists a coherent worldview in which you are not a person but a function, not a visitor but an ingredient, and the people holding that worldview have been expecting you for a very long time. The film builds its tension through music, which is an unusual choice and exactly the right one. The Islanders sing constantly, folk songs with melodies that are genuinely beautiful, and lyrics that, if you listen carefully, describe exactly what is being prepared and for whom. Hardy hides the threat in plain sight inside something that sounds like celebration, and the gap between the pleasant surface and what it is covering widens throughout the film until the final act collapses it entirely. Network television in America and Britain both struggled with The Wicker Man because the film offers no villain in any conventional sense. Lord Summerisle does not see himself as cruel. The villagers do not see themselves as murderers. They see themselves as farmers tending a relationship with forces older than any institution Howie represents, and the film refuses to argue with them on moral grounds. It simply shows you what their logic produces and leaves the judgment entirely to you. The ending was cut by distributors who did not understand what they had. The original negative was partially destroyed, and for years the full version existed only in fragments and rumors, which somehow made the film more powerful rather than less, because the missing footage became a kind of myth, and myths have a way of filling in whatever space the evidence leaves behind. What The Wicker Man leaves in the viewer is not fear of cults or remote islands, or charismatic aristocrats with unconventional theology. It leaves something quieter and harder to name, the understanding that a closed community with absolute internal consistency and no interest in your survival can be perfectly polite right up until the moment it is not, and that politeness and safety are not the same thing and never were. The Wicker Man trapped its protagonist inside a belief system that had prepared a specific role for him without his knowledge. The next film reverses that architecture entirely. Its protagonist is not trapped by a community's certainty. He is trapped by his own grief, by the refusal of his mind to accept what his eyes have already confirmed, and by a city that seems to rearrange itself around his loss in ways that may or may not be real.
Hey, Laura!
What on earth was that, John? It was Christine.
Christine is dead, Laura.
You're sad. You're so sad, and there's no need to be. I've seen her.
You can't contact people, can you? She's trying to get in touch with us. Just trying to warn us.
It begins with a child in a red coat at the edge of a garden pond, and a man inside the house who looks up from his work at the exact moment something goes wrong, a fraction of a second before he could have stopped it, which is the precise timing of every nightmare about the people you love. John Baxter is an architect restoring a church in Venice. His wife Laura is beside him. Their daughter Christine is outside. The water is still, and then it is not. And the film has already told you everything you need to know about what kind of story this is going to be, which is the story of a man who cannot stop looking backward at something that cannot be undone. Nicholas Roeg made Don't Look Now in 1973, and it remains one of the most formally sophisticated horror films ever produced by any director in any decade. Roeg edited the film in a way that collapses time, cutting between past and present and future without warning, so that the audience experiences the same temporal disorientation that John experiences as his grief begins to fracture his perception of what is real. The technique is not a stylistic flourish. It is the argument of the film. Roeg is telling you from the first frame that time in the story does not move in one direction, that what you are watching has already happened, and is still happening and will happen again, and that the man at the center of it has been given every warning and does not have the equipment to read them. Venice is the right city for this story, in the way that some locations are not just settings but active participants in the atmosphere of a film. The city is sinking. It has been sinking for a long time, and everyone who lives there has made peace with that fact in ways that outsiders find either beautiful or deeply unsettling depending on their temperament. The canals do not reflect cleanly. The alleys do not resolve into anything familiar. A figure glimpsed at the far end of a narrow passage may or may not still be there when you reach the corner. And the city has been built in a way that makes pursuit feel futile before it begins. Donald Sutherland plays John with a specific quality of a man whose intelligence is working against him. He is perceptive enough to notice every warning sign and rational enough to explain each one away. A blind woman who claims to be psychic tells him that Christine is nearby, that she is happy, that she is with them in Venice. And John's face in that scene does something very precise. It shows you a man choosing, in real time, between the comfort of belief and the discipline of disbelief, and choosing wrong. Julie Christie as Laura does something equally precise in the opposite direction. A woman who has found in the psychic's words a rope to hold on to in the water, and who cannot understand why her husband will not take hold of it with her. The most disturbing element of this film is not its famous scenes or its shocking conclusion. It is the accumulation of small wrongnesses throughout. The moments where the editing shows you something that the character has not yet processed, where Rogue places information in the frame that will only make sense retroactively, so that a second viewing becomes an entirely different experience of dread because you now know what every shadow is pointing toward. The film has been warning you the entire time. It warns you with the generosity and precision of a message written in a language you do not yet speak. Television could not handle. Don't look now because its structure requires sustained, uninterrupted attention of a kind that commercial breaks actively destroy. The rhythm of the film is the film. Cut it anywhere, and you lose the hypnotic compression that makes the ending land with the force it does. Several broadcast versions exist that are effectively different movies, not because scenes were removed, but because the pacing was altered, and pacing in this film is not a technical choice, but a physiological one. Rogi wanted your heart rate to be at a specific level when the final sequence begins, and he engineered every preceding minute to get it there. What Don't Look Now leaves behind is the particular vertigo of a film that treats grief as a perceptual condition, rather than an emotional one. John Baxter is not a weak man or a foolish man. He is a man whose love for his daughter has created a blind spot precisely the size and shape of what is hunting him through the streets of a sinking city. And the film's final gift to the audience is the confirmation that he was seeing clearly the entire time. He just did not know what he was looking at. Don't Look Now buried its terror inside a man's inability to read what was directly in front of him. The last film on this list takes a different approach entirely. It buries its terror inside a child, inside the body of someone who cannot yet have the language to explain what is happening, and it asks the adults around her to believe something so far outside their understanding of the world that by the time they accept it, accepting it no longer matters.
The father, the child, the stranger.
He's going to harm us. It's Ivy he's after.
The past, the present, the nightmare, the terror.
I saw her burn her hands on a cold window.
The movie. Audrey Rose, the novel of reincarnation, is now a spellbinding motion picture. The pain, the anger, the trial, the test.
Your eyelids are getting so heavy.
The question.
Audrey.
The answer.
Never the child!
The torment. The truth.
We are both a part of this child.
It will alter your ideas about life after death forever.
Nobody talks about this film anymore. That is not because it failed. It is because it succeeded in a way that made people want to put distance between themselves and what they had seen, which is a different thing entirely, and a far more revealing response than simple dismissal. Robert Wise directed Audrey Rose in 1977, 1 year after The Omen and 4 years after The Exorcist, which meant that audiences arriving at the theater had already been conditioned to expect a certain kind of child-centered horror, possession, spectacle, a battle between good and evil with clear sides, and a definable conclusion. Audrey Rose gives you none of that architecture. It gives you something quieter, and in many ways more disturbing, because it is not about evil. It is about love that has followed someone across the boundary that is supposed to make following impossible. Janice and Bill Templeton are a normal New York family. Their daughter Ivy is 11 years old, happy and unremarkable in the specific way that makes a parent feel, for once, that everything is going to be all right. Then a man named Elliot Hoover begins appearing outside their building. He is not threatening. He does not behave like a stalker or a predator. He behaves like a man in tremendous pain who has found, after years of searching, the one thing that could alleviate it. He believes that Ivy is the reincarnation of his daughter Audrey Rose, who died in a car fire at the exact moment Ivy was born, and that Audrey's unresolved terror from the moment of her death is still alive inside Ivy's body, surfacing in the nightmares that have been waking the child screaming since she was old enough to sleep alone. What Wise understood, and what makes this film so persistently unsettling, is that reincarnation horror operates on a completely different frequency than possession horror. Possession gives you an enemy. It gives you something that has invaded from outside, something that does not belong and can theoretically be expelled. Reincarnation gives you something that was already there before the child existed, something woven into the fabric of who she is, and the film's central horror is the slow parental realization that the thing tormenting your daughter is not separate from her, it is her, a version of her that existed before you knew her, that suffered something you cannot reach, that is asking for help in the only language available to it, which is her body and her voice, and her face contorted into an expression no 11-year-old should be able to produce. Anthony Hopkins plays Elliot Hoover with a restraint that is more unsettling than any amount of theatrical menace could have been. He is not a villain. The film works very hard to make sure you understand that he is not a villain, and that effort is precisely what makes him so difficult to watch, because a villain would be easier. A villain would give Bill Templeton, played by John Marley, something to fight, and fighting is the only framework Bill has for protecting his family. Hoover offers him nothing to fight. He offers him only a claim and evidence and a grief so complete and so carefully sustained that it has become indistinguishable from certainty. Marley's performance as a father watching his rational framework dissolve in real time is one of the most underrated pieces of acting in 1970s American cinema, precise and unshowy, and absolutely devastating in the film's final third. The courtroom sequence that anchors the third act was the specific reason network television would not air this film unedited, not because of anything graphic, but because the scene requires the audience to genuinely weigh a metaphysical claim inside a legal framework, to sit with the possibility that the court might be asked to rule on something for which no legal precedent exists and no evidentiary standard applies. Television in the late 1970s did not trust its audience to hold that kind of unresolved institutional vertigo, without a resolution that validated one side or the other. The film does not validate either side. It moves past the courtroom into something that cannot be adjudicated by any human institution, and it stays there. The final sequence of Audrey Rose is not violent. It does not rely on any of the conventional machinery of horror cinema. It is a child, and a room, and a temperature, and a sound, and the face of a mother who understands in the last possible moment that the thing she has been trying to protect her daughter from, and the thing she has been trying to protect her daughter for, were never separable. Marcia Mason plays that moment with a stillness that is harder to watch than screaming, because screaming would mean there was still something to be done. The film was a modest box office success, and then vanished. It has never received a major restoration. It has never been the subject of a serious critical reappraisal in mainstream horror discourse. The VHS copies that circulated in the 1980s were fourth and fifth generation dubs with washed out color and audio that faded in and out, which somehow made the experience of watching it in a dark room feel even more like something you were not supposed to have access to. The people who saw it that way, on a fuzzy tape at midnight, have never fully shaken it. Not because of what the film showed them, but because of the question it left running in the background of every quiet moment afterward. If the people you love carry within them the unfinished grief of lives you will never know about, what exactly are you holding when you hold them? 7 films. 7 different ways the 1970s found to get under your skin and stay there. Not one of them relied on a masked killer with a simple motive. Not one of them gave you a monster you could point to and name and feel safe once it was defeated. What they gave you instead was something the decade understood better than almost any other period in American cultural history, that the most durable fears are the ones that do not have a clean exterior, the ones that live inside grief, inside community, inside the people driving the car beside you on a dark highway, inside the body of someone you would do anything to protect. These films were too disturbing for television, not because of what they showed, but because of what they refused to resolve. Television in that era operated on a contract with its audience. Things will be explained, the threat will be contained, and you will go to bed with the shape of the world restored to something manageable. These 7 films tore that contract up. They sent you home with open endings and unanswered questions, and the particular discomfort of a story that does not believe resolution is something the universe owes you. The Venice canals are still there. The Texas highways still run straight and flat into the dark. Somewhere on a failing VHS tape in a box in someone's basement, Martin is still talking to a late-night radio host who thinks the whole thing is a joke. And Ivy Templeton is still waking up in the middle of the night from a dream about a fire she was never in. Think about the first time you watched one of these. Where were you sitting? Who else was in the house? Whether the lights were on or off, and whether that decision felt, in retrospect, like the right one. That memory belongs to you in a way that almost nothing else from that period of your life does, because fear at the right age leaves a mark that does not fade the way ordinary memories do. It just waits. If any of these films left that kind of mark on you, drop it in the comments. Tell me which scene you still think about. Tell me if there is a 1970s horror film that belongs on this list that I did not include, because there are titles from that decade that deserve this conversation and have been waiting a long time for someone to start it. If this video found you at the right hour, hit like. If you want to be here for the next one, subscribe, because we are not done. Next time we are going into something different. The horror films that critics dismissed when they came out, that audiences ignored, that disappeared from theaters in 2 weeks, and that somehow became the films a specific generation cannot stop returning to. The ones that were not ready for their moment when their moment arrived. The ones that are still waiting to be fully understood. The lights are yours to manage from here.
Subscribe for the next nightmare.